So without further ado, I think I'd like to introduce Marlene Trump, our CPEVC. Marlene is our campus provost and executive vice chancellor here at UCSC and professor of literature and critical race and ethnicity studies. Her work connects contemporary issues to cultural history with a focus on social justice. She is the author of Altered States, Sex, Nation, Drugs, and Self-Transformation in Victorian Spiritualism, The Private Rod, Sexual Violence, Marriage, and the Law in Victorian England, and over 20 articles on 19th century culture. She has also edited or co-edited and contributed to Fear and Loathing, Victorian Xenophobia, Victorian Freaks, The Social Context of Freakery in the 19th Century. Doesn't this all sound really interesting? I read this and think, whoa, I've lost my place. And Mary Elizabeth, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Braddon? Oh, I did it. Beyond Sensation and Abstracting Economics, Culture, Money, and the Economy in the 19th Century. She has another book under review, Force of Habit, Life and Death on the Titanic, and is at work on a new book, Intimate Murder, Sex and Death in 19th Century Britain, which explores deadly violence and intimate relationships. Dr. Trump is immediate past president of the North American Victorian Studies Association and a member of the board of directors of the 19th Century Studies Association. She is not only a well-published author, but also won teaching awards at every institution at which she has had the pleasure to teach. Please help me welcome our CPVC, Marlene Trump.
Good morning, everyone. I'm always struck when someone reads a list of my book titles, how many of them actually have the word, oh. Is it because I'm like a giant? Is that the problem? I'll do this. I'm always struck when someone reads a list of my book titles, how many of them actually have the word sex in it, which makes it sound like I'm a Freudian critic. I'm not. I'm mostly writing about gender in those books. It makes me especially excited to welcome you here this morning. I am so pleased to welcome you to the most beautiful college campus in America. Our campus was launched as a showcase for progressive, cross-disciplinary education. We are unique in that we simultaneously evolved into a modern research university with that same character remaining intact. So we are known for breaking the boundaries between disciplinary fields. For example, we are the university that sequenced and assembled the human genome. And our Human Genome Project is at work on solving complex problems like childhood cancer. We have been and continue to be pioneers in a range of areas. We have played a key role nationally in gender studies and politics. Our trailblazing History of Consciousness program actually changed the way people understood teaching in the academy. Our organic farm innovated organic strawberries. So every time you buy organic strawberries, think UC Santa Cruz. We've sent, from that organic farm where we trained thousands of people, we've sent people all over the world, so organic farming all over the world owes a debt to UC Santa Cruz. Our astronomy and astrophysics department are among the best in the world. We have faculty across divisions who are leaders in climate change research. I couldn't be more proud of the community here at UC Santa Cruz. Did you know that we are ranked third in the world for research influence? What that means is our faculty are cited the third most of any faculty in the world for the work that they are currently doing. That's in the company, of course, of schools like Berkeley, Stanford, and MIT. This year, we were named among the top 30 public universities in the nation by U.S. News and World Report. And right now we're at work on an exciting strategic academic plan, which is designed to capitalize on the strengths that founded us. So because we were founded on our residential college model, you're in one of the residential colleges right now. It's a living learning environment. It was designed to be thematically structured. So our faculty were brought to the campus to be housed in colleges rather than academic departments. which means that you could have an astrophysicist whose office was next door to a literature professor, whose office was next door to a sociology professor. And what that meant is our faculty thought in different ways about the kinds of questions that they were working on and answering. That continues to be true to this day. But as a mature research university that was doing this extraordinary research work, we really did need to develop academic departments so that our junior chemists had an opportunity to talk with and work with other chemists, for example. But we wanted to reinforce the thing that made us truly special. A story I've told before is that I visited with the president and the vice president of research at Stanford University last year. And after a glass of wine, the vice president of research got a little belligerent with me about UC Santa Cruz. He said, there is nothing that UC Santa Cruz can do that Stanford can't do better. Nothing. We can hire more faculty, we can build better facilities, we can hire more staff. There's nothing that we can do that UC Santa Cruz can't do better. And I said, oh, but there is something that we can do better. And he said, name it, name it, name it. I can't imagine a thing. And I said, because our faculty can talk to each other across their academic silos, we solve problems in different ways. That's how we assembled the human genome, and you guys didn't. And to his credit, he sat back in his chair and he said, by God, you're right. We can't do that. So we continue to do that with our strategic academic plan. We had groups from across the campus who came together to work on things, for example, like global health, justice in a changing world. We have a group working on climate change. We have a group working on racial justice and prison populations. Incredible work across our entire curriculum where our humanists are talking to our social scientists and our engineers, where folks are in dialogue all the time. It's really an exciting time at UC Santa Cruz. So it's a delight to welcome you here to this innovative, thrilling environment on, what did you call it, the Rainbow Day? On a day of extraordinary rainbow weather. One of the lovely things about Santa Cruz is it can rain like crazy, and then the sun comes out like this, and you're like, oh, it was there all the time. So we have an extraordinary, beautiful campus. I'm glad you're going to get a chance to tour it. I hope you'll get a chance to peek your heads into some of the buildings where you can see the marks of our research. I understand if you're going down to Seymour, you'll get to see some of the amazing things that are happening down there with coastal policy. We have an innovative coastal policy and natural sciences program that's a collaboration between our social sciences unit and our physical and biological sciences unit. So welcome to UC Santa Cruz. I'm delighted that you're here today. Thank you, Claudia.
So I'll start actually on the far end with Elizabeth Abrams. We're in her house. Elizabeth Abrams is Provost of Merrill College and Senior Teaching Professor in the Writing Program. Previously served as Chair of the Writing Program and Chair of the Council of Provosts. Her service in the Academic Senate includes her current role as Chair of the Committee on Affirmative Action and Diversity and previous positions as Chair of the Committee on Committees. Yes. I love that title. Faculty Welfare and Preparatory Education. She has also served on the committees on Planning and Budget and Teaching. As Chair of the Council of Provost, she helped lead the effort to create the campus's new academic literacy curriculum. Elizabeth is a graduate of our sister over here, Berkeley, the BA in English, and Yale University with Master's and Master of Philosophy in American Studies. Prior to UC Santa Cruz, she taught for 6 years in Harvard's expository writing program. Lori Kletzer, actually we're going right down the line, is Vice Provost and Dean of the Division of Graduate Studies and Professor of Economics at UCSC. She was Provost and Dean of the faculty at Colby College from 2010 to 2017. She earned her PhD in economics from UC Berkeley and her undergraduate degree from Vassar College. She has been affiliated with UCSC since 1992 and has contributed to the campus's chair of the economics department, academic senate chair, and vice chair. She has held teaching and research appointments at Williams College, the University of Washington, the Brookings Institution, the Peterson Institute for International Economics, the Global Network for Advanced Management, and at Berkeley's Institute for Research on Labor and Employment. Lori is the author of 2 books on the impact of trade and manufacturing on employment, jobs, and workers, and numerous journal articles. Her research focuses on the domestic labor market effects of globalization and policy responses. Katharyne Mitchell, did you guys all sit alphabetically too? So, Katharyne Mitchell is Dean of the Division of Social Sciences and Professor in the Department of Sociology. Katharyne came to UC Santa Cruz in 2017. Prior to arriving at UCSC, she served as chair in the Department of Geography at the University of Washington. From 2008 to 2013, I believe. Recent research includes work in global health, citizenship, and the city, and spaces of sanctuary. Most recent publications include the Handbook on Critical Geographies of Migration, Making Workers, Radical Geographies of Education, and Practicing Public Scholarship, Experiences and Possibilities Beyond the Academy. Dr. Mitchell received her BA from Princeton University, in cum laude, and in art and archaeology. That, I love those combinations. Oh. And MA and PhD from UC Berkeley in the Department of Geography. And our moderator, Lorena Penaloza, serves as UCSC's Chief Campus Counsel, joined our campus in 2017. She provides advice to the university on a broad range of legal issues, including employment, policy, and student safety and conduct issues. She reports jointly to Chancellor Blumenthal and UC Systems Senior Vice President and General Counsel Charles Robinson, and serves on the respective leadership teams. Prior to joining UC, Lorena worked for the Office of General Counsel for the Cal State University System, where she first served as a litigator and then as university counsel for 2 of the system's 33 campuses. She also served as assistant city attorney with the city attorney's office for the city of Santa Ana, and began her legal career with the Social Security Administration's Office of the General Counsel in Maryland through the Presidential Management Fellowship, formerly known as Presidential Management Internship Program. Lorena earned her BA in Sociology and Political Economies of Industrial Societies from, and let's say it together, UC Berkeley, and her JD from the University of California, Hastings College of Law. Join me in welcoming our very esteemed leaders.
Well, good morning, everyone. I can't tell you, I'm sort of embarrassed now that my bio felt like it was the longest and I actually have the least important role here. Thank you. But I'm so excited to be here with you this morning, primarily because I got a bird's eye view of just what an incredible experience it is to listen to this distinguished panel of women speak about their experiences and the things that they've accomplished and how they see the big question that we're dealing with today, which is women in leadership roles. So I'm so excited to just be here in the room again to absorb it all, and I hope you are as excited as I am. My role here is really just to guide the conversation as best I can, but I tell you, it feels like such an easy role because I've already sort of gotten a peek of all the exciting things that they have to say. And I'm really excited to be invited and to be a part of this because I think it's really important for us to continue to have these conversations and to give back, because I know that I was supported by so many amazing women, my mom as my #1 fan, but so many amazing women, and it's my way of also giving back and showing my own appreciation for where I've gotten and what I've accomplished. Without any further ado, I'm just going to start off with a couple of questions, and I'm going to have our distinguished panel sort of give us their perspective. One of the things that we wanted to tackle this morning, an easy one, I'm sure, but and probably one that you all relate to as well and think about on a daily basis, and it is, what are the challenges for women in leadership roles in higher education? And why don't we start off with Marlene? Does that sound good? Sure. Thank you.
Little different part of this dialogue for me. I think women continue to face incredible burdens in leadership. The idea that, I think my grandmother had when she started a church, broke away from her church and began her own church, and was told women weren't allowed to do those things, or the idea that my mother had when she went to work as one of the women who was working during the war. I think the idea that they had that by the time I ended up working, it would be a very, very different world. Now, it is, to be sure, true. I couldn't be in the role that I'm in if it wasn't a very different world. But there continue to be disproportionate burdens that women carry. And it's part of the reason that this kind of program and this kind of mentorship and this kind of engagement and this kind of conversation remains so critical, because women need models of women in leadership, and women need that ongoing support. So I think that's where I'd begin.
Sounds good. Glory?
Sure, I'd be happy to. When the question is, what are the challenges for women in leadership? I'm always want to lead with, I feel very honored and lucky to be in the job I'm in and the jobs that I've had in leadership. And I want to stipulate the positive nature of that as a foundation to being able to plunge into what the challenges are, right? So please don't take any of this as any kind of negativity. In fact, I don't think any of us could do the jobs we do if we didn't find that, as we'll be able to talk about later, if we didn't find a real core of positive contribution from these kind of leadership roles. That said, there are challenges. I very much share with Marlene almost a sense of wonder across generations, from my grandmother who worked and my mother who worked, but both of whom faced really serious opposition to that, to my generation where working and working while having a family was just taken as what you were going to do. So while I want to, and I think it's important to talk about the challenges, I recognize that the challenges we face today are built on the very hard work of the women across generations who did this before us, because the place of women in the labor force, and I'm a labor economist, which you could probably tell from my bio, the place that women have now in the labor force is in fact secure. In many places, women are half of the labor force. That is surely not the case in leadership, however. And I know that all of us face a really fundamental challenge of whenever we walk in the door in a leadership way, we have to prove our competence. Whereas, for other people, let me call them men, the competence is assumed at the outset. And so while there are many variations to that challenge of constantly having to prove one's competence, in many ways it is the central challenge for women in leadership, is the constant need to have to prove one's competence.
Before we go on, I just wanted to make sure that you all knew that at the end of the presentation we'll have a few minutes for questions, about 15 minutes or so. So as you wait patiently, and Katharyne, if you could continue, I think one of the things that we talked about when we all got together was, and to carry on to what Lori was saying, is this notion that we sort of have to prove themselves, and also this notion that being a woman leader is still sort of this exceptional idea. We don't really see a lot of men leadership conferences or discussion, but we still see this as part of our topic area. If you could share some of your thoughts on that.
Well, I want to start by agreeing with Lori that it's an honor and a privilege to have these positions, so we don't take that for granted at all. And we have come a long way. At the same time, I also agree with her that there's still a long way to go. And I've learned a lot from my older sister. I'm the youngest of 6, and my oldest sister is 17 years older than I am. She was one of 2 women at Harvard Medical School in the late 1960s, and one of the professors handed out assignments to them, and they gave the assignments to the men in blue and to the 2 women in pink. But the interesting thing about my sister's career is that she went on to very distinguished career, but always thought it wasn't her job to pay attention to what was happening to her vis-a-vis what was happening to her male colleagues. And as a result, because she thought I'm a scientist and I do science, as a result, when she left the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill after being the director of the cancer center there and getting comprehensive cancer status to take a position at Stanford to begin a comprehensive cancer center at Stanford, she discovered that she was being paid $50,000 less than her male colleagues. So that was a real eye-opener for me, and this is something that I study as well. So it wasn't something that was completely a surprise to me in the sense that, I mean, she's a natural scientist or a doctor, and so it's not in her realm to study political economy, so labor. But it is for me, and yet it was still a surprise to me that someone so high up in her career, so, having done so well in her life, that could still happen to her. So I made it a challenge and an opportunity for myself as dean to make sure that wasn't going to happen to me or to any of the women that are working with me. And one of the first things I did when I came in as dean is to make sure that the assistants that are closest to me, my staff, there were 4, one had retired, the 2 men were assistant deans and the 2 women were not. And they're equal in terms of the work that they do. And so my first thing that I did was to raise their salaries and make them assistant deans. So this is the kind of thing where you have to notice. You can't just assume, like my sister did, that merit is going to win out, that we operate in a meritocracy. Unfortunately, we don't. And so, but it takes women in leadership, I think, and men too who are savvy to this, and there are many. But I think particularly because we've experienced it and we've seen it in our daily lives and in our families, it really takes us to be the ones to look around and make those changes.
So it won't surprise you to hear that my opportunities in leadership really blossomed when I left Harvard and came to the University of California. And I'm grateful for that every single day. I have an astonishing career here that I never would have had I stayed there. But I also want to say that 30 years ago, when I was a graduate student, I helped organize a panel that was pretty much like this panel, with pretty much the same questions and a few more I think that demonstrates to a degree what the challenges of being a woman in leadership or just being a woman in a field, any field, still pose to us. The same questions, we're still asking them, we're still answering them. I just happen to be on the other side of the table this time around. I'm no longer in American Studies, I'm in Writing Studies. So I am a person who's in a field that is perhaps not dominated by women, but probably about 50-50 women and men. And I'm also in a position, or have been in the position, of being a lecturer and not on the latter faculty. And so in multiple different kinds of ways, my role has been the role of the person in less power, perceived as being in a lesser field and in a lesser position. I guess what I'd say is the challenges of being a woman and a leader in the roles that I've had. Honestly, I don't think that they're any different than the challenges that any woman faces in a position of leadership. I get mansplained to, and I get interrupted and talked over, and I push back the same way all of you do. So those kinds of, those are the normative experiences in some ways, to the extent that I really don't even think about it that much anymore until I catch myself and realize this should not be my daily experience.
I might add one more thing, and that's that I think that When you're affiliated with a university, often you feel like, well, in this environment, right, like people's consciousness is raised, they're trained, that might even be something that they've studied in their field of research. So here it's not going to be a problem, right? And of course, in some ways, being in those environments where people think they've already got it all figured out makes them even less attentive. I sometimes wonder, like if I were working at an Army college, would people at least be aware that there was gender discrimination that still existed, right? You know, and I often, when I teach classes in feminist studies, I'll have students say, oh yeah, but see, we solved sexism in the 70s and racism in the 60s, and then they smile. You know, and we can see now, in this particular cultural moment, we can see now that's not true. But one of the things people really resist is the idea that it could be a part of their own behavior, or especially in environments where people consider themselves enlightened. And so it can sometimes even be harder in those environments to do that work. And the other thing that I would say is that it's, as Elizabeth was saying, there are many factors that can influence how you get marked and the ways in which you're perceived and how that affects the way people treat you, your class background, your racial or ethnic identity, the kind of accent you have or don't have, you know, how your appearance. There are so many things that can play a role in also layering on, and what's been critically called intersectionality, layering on those identities. And I think about Lorena even coming in as chief campus counsel for a major research university, and what it was like to be a woman coming into that position. Maybe you could say a word about that.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, you know, it's funny that we continue to, there are multiple layers, as Marlene said, about who we are in these leadership positions. You know, I still, get faced with interesting moments, walking into a courtroom and being confused for the court reporter or the interpreter, even though I'm wearing the same monkey suit that everybody else is wearing, and walking into the bar, into the well, just like every other attorney in the room. You know, often being confused for someone else and never sort of the attorney of the room, or even as when I served as a temporary judge, again, being confused for someone else on staff as opposed to that position. And one of the things that we talked about too is the notion that as a woman, you also have to have a certain style in order to be perceived as a leader. And if you come in gracious, polite, warm even, or even show any sense of vulnerability, that somehow all of those things are perceived as weaknesses as opposed to strong leadership qualities. And as a woman of color, and certainly as a Latina, if I get passionate about an issue, it is immediately attributed to my race, my inability to control myself or think clearly, you know, those kinds of things. And it's funny that it goes one step beyond the fact that I'm a woman. It's also that I am Latina or Mexican or whatever they think that I am, because I've gotten a lot of variations of that. But it also makes me realize that my mere presence in the room is important, and that the challenges that I see, that I saw growing up, was not seeing women like me with my intersectionality. I'm a first-generation Latina. I came from a very poor socioeconomic background, from the Central Valley, from a farm-working community. I was a monolingual Spanish speaker when I started out in school, and so I didn't see anyone in my roles for very, very, sort of in leadership positions for a very, very long time, and so never knew that someone like me could be who I am today. I did. My saving grace, of course, is I come from a long line of very strong women who, despite, you know, a number of their own challenges, socioeconomic, class, language barriers, you know, just were moms, you know, survivors, did whatever they could to make it right, and even if that meant overcoming their own fears about what they didn't know. And so that sort of, I think, helps transition me into our second question, which is, you know, given these challenges that we face, why bother being a leader, right? I mean, as Elizabeth said, 30 years ago, she planned a similar session, and we're still asking similar questions. So is it worth it? Why do we do it? Yeah, who wants to take that one on? You want Katharyne?
Thank you. I feel like I kind of answered that a little bit at the end of my last statement, because my staff is forever grateful. Is not the right word. They see me seeing them, and their lives have changed because of that. And that alone is worth my having taken the position. The faculty, I think, also see that I notice. I'm aware of all the kinds of ways that we're either dominant or subordinate because of structural systems in society, and how that we have to challenge those all the time. We can't ever rest. And I think my willingness and eagerness to take those kinds of challenges on really makes a difference. And sometimes when I have a bad day, in addition to being able to ride down the hill on my bike and see the bay, which also always gives me a sort of uplift, it's having the staff say, please don't get discouraged, please don't go, please stay, and faculty too, and that makes me realize, yes, it's worth it. I'm making a difference.
I'll pick up where Katharyne ended. For me, it's about making a difference. I am forever asked in my current role, but don't you miss teaching? And of course I miss teaching. Teaching and research were an important part of what pulled me into earning a PhD in economics and wanting to be an academic, and the sense in which, as an educator, that you can help frame and form future generations and help them be inspired by problems and learn how to analyze those problems and devise solutions. All of that future orientation pulled me into being an academic, and it remains what motivates me in the leadership position as well, is that it's another way within higher ed to make a difference and to help frame and form future generations. I got to the place where I felt that I could make the biggest difference in administration, and whether that was through helping form initiatives that can transform a curriculum or inspire and support new research, or whether that's just helping the institution work better, right? I find I take enormous inspiration from being able to do this work, and in large part help other people do their jobs better. So, and that is part of the honor of being in these kind of jobs. And like Katharyne, we have days where they're enormously frustrating, and yes, it helps to be able to cruise back down the hill. For me, it's January, being able to swim in an outdoor pool at 6 o'clock in the morning, as perverse as that must sound, right? But there are obviously wonderful advantages to being here and at this university. I have a very long association with this campus, and spent, though, the first 20 years not being in administration, and then moved into it. But for me, it's really, this is where I can make the biggest difference right now, and whether that is for faculty, staff, or students. The last thing I'll say is somewhat similar to what Katharyne said. I have a staff member who is soon to move on and leave the graduate division. And in our exit interview, she said, here's what I really want you to know. We all love it when you fight for us. When you get no for an answer and then you say, but I'm not going to take no for an answer, and you find a way through it, that tells us that you value what we do as well as valuing the rest of what goes on this campus. And those are the kind of moments that really keep you going, especially at those acute moments of frustration.
Okay. What makes it worth it? I'm not quite an administrator. I am an administrator. I'm a half-time administrator. My job as provost is 50% time, and the other 50% of the time I'm a professor. What that means is I'm kind of the non-commissioned officer of the administration ranks, and it gives me a chance to speak effectively to students and lecturers and other faculty members, and also to administrators and the top brass of our campus, and actually beyond as well. That's a really privileged position, and it's in positions like that, those slightly in-between spaces, that I can make myself heard, where I can transmit the stories from one place to the other place, where I can serve as a bridge. That's incredibly useful. I'm still teaching. I'm not teaching all that much, but when I do teach, as is common at UCSC, I'm teaching a lot of students who are first-generation students, a lot of students who come from pretty underprivileged backgrounds, and I have time to sit in my office with those students and hear their stories. And as Katharyne said, listen to what they have to say and allow them to experience being listened to. That also helps create ideas. It helps us, and those who are in positions like mine, there are a bunch of us, it helps us create programs that can work for those students, and also for the lecturers, for the other faculty, and for the administration. It's, like I said, it's a very privileged position, and it's kind of a lot of work, but it's so worthwhile to be able to create those bridges.
When I was a little girl, I grew up, as Lorena did, I grew up very poor. And when I was a little girl, I just had this sort of sparkling optimism that you could do things to make the world a better place. I just believed it from my core. And that's all I ever really wanted to do. And I didn't have any consciousness that my gender would have any part to play in this. So I asked my dad when I was a little girl, could I be president of the United States? And he said, yes, honey, you can. And my parents were 2 generations older than I was, so for a man of his generation to believe that I could be president of the United States, that was incredibly inspiring to me. And so I stumbled across the things that girls in school stumble across. My favorite teacher in the 6th grade, we were doing math races in a semicircle in class, and I was sitting next to the smartest math boy in class, and I was beating him. So the teacher would give us problems, and we'd race to solve them, and my hand would shoot up, and I was thinking, this is pretty cool, because I had never thought that I was necessarily that good at math. And here I was tearing it up, and I was starting to develop more and more enthusiasm and excitement. And then this teacher that I loved, whose erasers I clapped after school, said to me in front of the whole class, Marlene, are you cheating off of Tracy's paper? Now, logically speaking, the fact that I was getting the answer first meant that was not true. But it was so incomprehensible to her, a woman teacher, that I could be beating this boy in math. And that was a lesson I carried with me until I was in college. I actually, in high school, I took a test for math on the track bus on the way to a track meet, because I was like, I'm not good at math. Why should I even try? But when I went to college and math was a required part of the curriculum, and I had to take calculus as a part of my major, I felt like I had to learn it, and I got so good at it that I actually became a calculus tutor. And I remember thinking at that moment, Mrs. Parker, I can do math. But I really think it wasn't just about me discovering that for myself. The older I got, the more I saw that women and people of color and people who came from backgrounds that were not privileged and people who had different identity positions, if they were queer or different or whatever, or from outside the country. My parents were Finnish immigrants, and they never spoke Finn outside the home because they were so ashamed of being immigrants. Those kinds of barriers that people have to surmount deny us so much of the beauty and the talent that people have to offer. And so that desire that I had to change the world, that little bit of hope that I had planted in me, is something that drives me to this day. That's all I care about. My son finds it disgusting. With your talent, you could have made so much money in business, he tells me. Why did you go into higher ed? And for me, it's about that desire to still be a part of changing the world. And part of the way I think we can do that is by giving to each other, and by me having a class where I pull a young woman aside after class and say, you don't have to say after you make a statement in class, is that okay? You don't have to begin your statement with, this might sound stupid, but that's a part of it. But also just being here, the 5 of us being in these positions says not just to the people in our offices, but to everyone in this university that we are capable of doing that leading, and that changes what's possible for everyone around us.
Thank you. If I could maybe, if I could then maybe take a point of personal privilege to continue on to that point. I think one of the common threads is really that where we are makes a real difference, and the power of one person. I was sharing with these amazing women the story of sort of just my upbringing and not knowing even the notion that college existed. But I happened to be a real good kid in school because it sort of took me away from the poverty that was my home, and did really well. I was very excited. And I had someone take an interest in me, my principal, who informed me there was this program called Upward Bound that prepared students for college. And I was like, I have no idea what that is. None. But he was so adamant that I was a good candidate that he came to my house. To my very traditional Mexican family house, where no one comes unless they're invited, to speak to my mom and dad about who I was and what I could do. And again, it's this notion that that person cared enough to come, and despite my dad, who was very traditional and said, no, she's gonna get married, that's her path. My mom, even despite her own fears and not knowing, said, okay, yes, she can be in this program. And that opened up just an entire universe that I didn't even know existed, what was possible. And that one person put me on a trajectory to where I am today. But I can also see that my trajectory has also impacted my family. So that then when my brother asked to go to college, it was no big deal. And my 2 sisters grew up, we have a 12-year age difference, grew up knowing what college was and with the expectation that they would go. And that is then carried on to my cousins, who have all now gone to college as well, because they knew growing up that college was something that you aspired to. To my nephew, who's the love of my life, has never experienced the idea that professionals in the family and college and traveling and trying new things is a way of life. That's what his world has been. He's never known, he thankfully and hopefully won't, he's never known poverty. He's never known what it's like to have women who are disempowered, or what abuse is like. I mean, his world vision of what he thinks of women and men and professionals is completely different than what I considered. And that one trajectory resulted in me being a lawyer, my brother being an electrical engineer for Caltrans, my baby sister being a lawyer at the San Francisco DA's office, and my other sister finishing up nursing school. My cousins are all in business for themselves. And I'm so excited to see what's going to happen to my munchkin, who's my nephew. I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, the world is unlimited. But it's, it sort of starts the impact that one person can have. And when I can see that my trajectory as a result of the impact of this one person so dramatically changed the trajectory of my family, I know that I can have that effect anytime I'm in a room and someone who looks like me or comes from a similar experience sees themselves reflected in me. And that is a transformational change, a life-changing experience. Just connecting and doing something like even having a conversation with them that says, these are all the options. Because often it was like, where do I go to college? Like, who do I talk to about that? And there were obstacles along the way. I was valedictorian of my high school, but my counselors didn't think I should go to college. I mean, just a number of different things that you still face those challenges at every step of the way, but it takes one person to help guide that way. And so I try to do things like this. I try to do mentorship, and so that sort of helps me transition to our next question, which is, how do we mentor the next generation of women leaders? What ideas that can we walk away with today? What can we implement in our own lives and our own practices that will help change the lives and transform and develop future women leaders? Elizabeth, you want to start?
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
I think one of the most important things that we can do is tell our stories. We got together a couple days ago just to run through these questions and have a conversation because the five of us had never sat down and had this conversation before. It turns out we had a lot of shared experiences. And although on the one hand I wasn't surprised at all, we are, after all, women of a certain age who have had certain experiences. On the other hand, it was incredibly surprising to me because I think of my colleagues on this panel as, powerful, impervious, able to shape worlds. And when we tell our own stories, when we tell the stories of difficulty, and when we tell the stories of triumph, we're also sharing with the people we mentor the fact that they can make it through whatever gets thrown their way as well. I think those stories are important to hear. And then in some really practical ways, I used to chair the ridiculously named Committee on Committees. The marvelous thing about the Committee on Committees is that it's the committee that puts other people on committees. And so on the one hand, people run screaming from us when they see us. And on the other hand, it took me a few years to discover this, but it's the way one can shape an institution. Because if you pick the right people for certain positions, then you can reshape how the institution operates. And that was an amazing lesson to learn. There aren't too many committees like that out there, but there are all kinds of positions in which one has an influence, and if you think about the long game, you can really change things.
So I completely agree. I once, when I was a faculty member at my previous institution, spoke with a dean who was a woman, and she said to me, all of the power in this position resides on the lists that you make of the people who are going to then make the decisions. So the search committees, the deciders of who's going to be on some kind of board, the panel, who's putting together the panel, that's the key moment. It's not the final decision because you've got 4 candidates and all 4 are men or 3 men and 1 woman. You have to go up up to the one level to the person that's helping to create that list. And that's really stuck with me. If you wait to the last minute, then you're not ever going to have the choice of the woman, who will always be the woman out of the group that you've given, and that person will always fall off. The other thing I agree with is that we have to show the paths and give the opportunities and lead by example, but never sugarcoat the challenges. There are a lot of challenges, and I think, like my sister, not sort of seeing those challenges and then being caught by them. I don't want that to happen to the next generation of people who are taking on these positions. I want them to go in eyes open, and therefore really looking and listening, like I try to do. We have a case right now of a female professor who's being targeted by someone outside the community, and it's what happens when you're out in the public, which we should do. We're a public research institution. We should be working with the community. We should be talking about our findings and giving talks. But it can lead to aggressive responses if you're saying something that's not what people want to hear. Or in her case, she didn't say what the person did want to hear, and so he was furious about that. Didn't talk on his favorite topic. And so she's been the target of a real harassment a campaign of harassment and defamation, and it's scary. I think it's obviously scary for everybody, but I think there's a way that it's particularly scary for women because we don't know the kinds of violence that people are capable of against us. I mean, we do know that, and but we don't know in the specific cases whether these people are going to follow us out to our cars, so it's and we've set up affinity groups and workshops and worked with Lorena and the police to make this person feel supported. But this is something that all of our faculty and all of our leaders need to know that is a challenge that's not sugar-coated when you take on positions of leadership, whether that's giving a talk in the community or taking a role as the EVC. There are going to be people who don't like your decisions, they don't like what you say, and they don't like the fact that a woman is saying those things. So we have to have people be aware of that going into those positions, and then also try to help everyone deal with whatever the ramifications there are from taking on those leadership positions.
I spend a fair amount of time thinking about mentoring and how it is, again, from this position of being grateful to the generations of women who have come before me and have made a difference in my life. I think about how it is that I can play a similar role for future generations, particularly in the leadership perspective. And as in higher ed, it takes some additional thinking. If you were listening carefully to what Elizabeth said, right, and we shared some of this with each other a couple of days ago, especially at research-intensive institutions, the path into administrative leadership is a vexed one at best. It often means, I admitted to it, right, you step away or reduce your teaching. It often means that you have a less active research agenda than when you are a full-time faculty member, and the coins of the realm here are and should be teaching and research along with service. And so it's a dated joke, and it's not always said as a joke, but I'm often forced to confront with, as an administrator, that I've gone to the dark side. There is a certain dark side element. We all admitted it to each other. You heard it in Elizabeth's, when she said she's kind of a quasi-administrator, right, or a non-commissioned officer, right, and in a lovely way, right, in a lovely way. That actually, to me, structurally makes it really interesting to think about leadership, because for our very successful developing faculty, we are actually suggesting that if it's right for their personality and what they want to do within this institution, when you make that suggestion or show as a role model the path into administrative leadership, you are going against the grain, right? And that's, I think, in other industries, much less present, right? It's much less present in other industries that in order to succeed, the path is actually to rise up the ranks and to be leadership. And we have a much more interesting, and I'm not suggesting at all I would trade it, but it is actually really interesting to create situations where you can mentor and develop the next generation of leaders. And that is often by bringing them into the work that you do. In the graduate division, for example, the grad division has over the past few years, and I will be posting a job ad for this position in the next couple of days, an associate dean of the graduate division who will be, as Elizabeth noted, a half-time administrator, still have teaching responsibilities, but come into the graduate division in a non-commissioned officer kind of way to really experience what it's like to be an administrator in the graduate division, but to still have one foot in teaching and in research. And my own experience has been that these kind of preliminary administrative roles, they either open doors or they slam them shut, which is exactly what we want them to do, right? They're either experiences that really show what you can do depending on your own vision and personality. They show you what you can do, or they show you that maybe not, right? But those, whether it's for our faculty or our students, right, we actually want to create those opportunities. So I have one of the activities that I really do spend a fair amount of time on, both structurally and by my own personality, is thinking about the future generation of women leaders in higher ed.
I was thinking about it as these other brilliant women were talking. And I think in my own mind, as they talked, I distilled it down for me into two things. I want to say yes, and I want to say no. And I'm going to talk about the no first. I want to use the position of power that I already have to say no where I see injustice and unfairness. And this is something Katharyne talked about at the beginning of her remarks. The privilege of her position gives her the power to do that. One of the reasons I became an administrator is I was doing feminist activist work, and a group of activists asked me to take on administrative work when I went off to an academic career. I was a graduate student at the time. I was horror struck for precisely the reason that Lori mentioned. I said, I don't want to be an administrator. I want to be one of the good guys. And they spent a long time persuading me why they thought that it was really important for me to do. And what they essentially said is there need to be some people who are willing to step into that role to use their power for good. And so part of what that power gives me the opportunity to do is to say no when I see injustice, is to say this is intolerable. And where other people might go, well, but he's really a great guy and he's contributed all these things, I can say, actually, that's not acceptable behavior. And we're not going to tolerate that behavior. And so the power to be able to be the one who adjudicates those cases and can say no, that is really important, because women are, whether it's training or biology or a combination of both, whatever your philosophical perception is of this, women see the world a little differently. And if women see the world differently, by God, we need them to see things in places where they're the ones making the decisions. So I feel like it's a high risk place to be in, because as Katharyne said, you make those decisions, sometimes you're going to make people angry, and in a different way than you would if you're a man. This is a cultural phenomenon, right? It's a little bit like the difference between, I was sitting with a physics professor once. We were both grading. He was marking papers and I was marking papers. And we were talking about our students, and he said, a student would never come to me and say, you must have misread my brilliant essay, because really I deserved an A. He would say, he said they would come to me and say, I just still don't understand this and I need to work harder. Can you tell me what I need to do? And in the same way, there's a difference between that. Like I might have people come to me after I've made a decision and say, you surely were mistaken in this decision that you made, because you're not favoring the position that I've taken up. And I have to remind them that in fact, and this comes full circle, in fact, to the way we began, yes, in fact, I did do my homework and I did make the analysis, and I decided the answer was no. But I also think an important part of the power that I've been privileged to have is to say yes. And so I want to say yes to a different kind of activity, a different kind of thing. When we didn't have enough opportunities for people to advance into administrative roles and do leadership positions on our campus, I said, let's create a program that allows people to have essentially fellowships where they work with key administrators. So Lori restructured her unit. I said, let's set up a program. We've got 9 new people who are going, most of whom are women, who are going to have an opportunity to do this fellowship program so they can experience what those leadership roles are like. So I can say yes to activities, but the other thing, and this is, we've heard this so much in things people have said today, I want to be one of the people that tells people who are being told in a million different ways because of the position they inhabit, I want to be one of the people who says to them, you can do this. So there was a Payway down the road from my old house that I stopped in. My son loved their dinners, and I'd stop in sometimes to get him something from Payway. And there was this incredibly bright, competent young woman who was the front of the restaurant manager. And I talked to her a few times, and then I carry, actually, the reason I carry my business cards, I rarely give my business cards to colleagues. This is who I give my business cards to. I said to her one day, can you take 10 minutes to talk with me after I placed my order? And she said, we're really busy right now. And I said, I think this is really important. I think she probably thought I was going to complain. So she stepped aside, and I brought her over to the side of the restaurant. I said, here's my business card. I don't know why you haven't gone to college yet, but you could, because you're so sharp, and you have your whole life ahead of you. So maybe you want to be here, and you want to do great things at Payway, but if you want to do other things, and you want to go be CEO of IBM, we can help. And we think those things all the time. We encounter people all the time, young people, mature people all the time, who we think are gifted or talented, and we walk away and say to our friend or say to ourselves, she's so bright. But we need to say it to them. I was on a subway in New York recently, and there was a woman with an African-American woman with a young boy. He was so sharp. We rode on the train together for a long way. And my son is biracial. And he's been told over and over and over again that he's a troublemaker. He's a brilliant child. He is a troublemaker, I will affirm. That's true. But what they see about him is that he is a troublemaker, not how incredibly bright and gifted he is. So at the end of the train ride, I walked up to this woman and I handed her my business card and I said, look, and he was young. He was maybe 5 or 6 years old. I said, look, I work for a university and my job is to assess how bright people are, and I want you to know how bright your son is. And whatever obstacles you have to hurdle over, don't ever forget and remind him all the time how bright and talented he is, because he can do amazing things in the world. So please say yes, because you're here because you've done amazing things with your life. There are so many people out there who have obstacles in front of them who, if you say yes, they might do them too.
Thank you. So thank you, all 4 of you, for your amazing talking points and presentations and for sharing your stories. And I think now is a good time. We have about 9 minutes. I'd like to open up for questions if anybody has any questions for this amazing group. Yes?
We're recording this, so we want to make sure
All right.
everybody is heard.
Okay, thank you again. as women's groups here, women's clubs, section clubs, university women that aspire to help and do things for our communities, how would our clubs establish a mentorship section? Where would we turn? I mean, it might be a group in, high school group that you came up through, or something in the university where we could, help students. They're already there. But my question is, if I was going to establish a mentoring section, how might we go about that? Where would we turn to get information? What kind of groups help move things into, campus life?
Marlene, you'd like to take that on? Okay.
Thank you so much for saying that. I think that's so important. And I would encourage all of you who are interested in this, you have a wealth of wisdom and inspiration to share with the young people on college campuses and with the young staff on college campuses. And so many of them are, what we know about first-generation college students is that if they have something like a library fine or a parking ticket, that may be the thing that makes them drop out. It's not their grades. It's having another hurdle to go over. And so if there are people who can help them, you have so much to give. And so I would encourage you, I would tell you to go to the Provost's office to help set up a program like that. But within the academic units, so seek out the leadership and let them find the right places for you, because that willingness, oh man, when I look out at this room full of women, room full of people, what I think is there are so many things that you could give that could change people's lives.
I was going to say, in addition to your collective wisdom, you also have a lot of connections at this point in your lives, and we can really use that. We are often interested in internships for our students, and so please, if you have any kind of knowledge of a community organization or a business that's looking for someone, please let me know. So I'm the Dean of the Social Sciences, and just contact me, and I'll put you together with people who can maybe identify students who'd be appropriate for those positions.
I'd also add you should connect with your student affairs office. They often run and help organize and coordinate a lot of the student organizations on campus that are usually organized around certain affinity groups. So that's a good way to sort of begin to establish a program or connect directly with a student organization on something like a mentorship. They have a lot of experience developing those kinds of programs and can really sort of give you the jump start that you need to be able to do something like that.
And I would love to add, to just expand the circle a little wider. There's also mentorship in your own communities, especially for first-generation students. The notion of going to college, well, we have the benefit, we see the ones who are already in college, but in our high schools where we know there is often one counselor who has to do more than be a college counselor. There's one per every 500 students. In your own communities, you can carry your life experiences and help mentor those who in their own families cannot see the possibilities for college. Those are the students we want to have at places like UC Santa Cruz. So it's not just at college. I would really encourage you to think about your own connections and opportunities in your communities where you can help us frame the future generations of college students.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Okay, right here in the front. Mm-hmm.
I was going to ask something else, but this has inspired me to pass something on to the women from the other campuses. I'm from Berkeley, and I'm the founder of an organization that gives college scholarships to graduates of Berkeley High who are the first in their generation to go to college. They also have to be of low income, but who are doing well in high school. But those scholarships come with a mentor, and it's a really exciting program, and we have something like a 90% success rate in graduation. And one of the early graduates of the program at our last fundraising dinner who's now an attorney working on immigration issues. It's incredibly rewarding. The people who are mentors feel that they get more out of it than they give to the students. So I suggest that your other communities that have children of low income and immigrant families primarily, that this is a hugely rewarding things to do. So I suggest that you go ahead and do it.
Thank you.
Okay. Then if you can all join, can we get one more question, do you think? Okay, why don't we go ahead?
Where was that?
Right there in the green.
Oh.
Thank you to the panelists. Very inspiring. Thank you for sharing your stories. I wanted to share just one story, picking up from what Marlene said, and then I have another question. The mentoring, I think, can really begin in the grade schools. And I really believe that because I'm a first-generation college or university graduate, born and raised in Hawaii. And I remember a 5th grade teacher. I was a real bad kid as far as being hyperactive. And I remember I still have my report cards from kindergarten. And always everything, excellent, excellent, excellent. But back then it was deportment is what they characterize our character and behavior. Very poor, it actually was needs improvement. But I remember being very bad in grade school. But in the 5th grade, the 5th grade teacher one summer, and I don't know if she did this every summer for her certain students she selected. There were 4 of us that jumped in her Jeep. For whatever reason, I was one of them. She picked us up every day for 2 weeks and took us to the art academy, to cultural activities, implanting some of these things that I needed, that I might need for my future, growing up in a very modest family. So I really believe it begins early. And when you get to high school, I remember in high school in Hawaii, and maybe it's the same way for some of you, it was in the 60s. They tracked students. So I was in a college prep program. So everybody I was with were college prep students. And I don't know why they picked us, maybe our grades or our test scores. But if I had not been tracked and placed in those classes, I probably would not have gone on to the university. So I thank those teachers for that. And then I know it's long-winded, but my next question was on equal pay for equal work. There was a legislation just passed yesterday in Congress, and it's actually the second one. How do we, even though laws are passed for equal pay for equal work, how are they enforced? Because we know in the private industry especially, and schools like the university, that there is not equal pay. The government, maybe yes, but not equal pay.
Just a minute to answer that quickly.
We don't have a ton of time left, so you can just take a quick minute to answer.
Just a quick minute.
So we probably, right. The question was about, more broadly, equal pay for equal worth. And then there's within that, particularly in the example that Katharyne shared, equal pay for the same job title. Those 2 questions are not the same. The first one, equal pay for equal worth, is really much more complicated, right? By example, the pay for nurses, right, versus the pay for executive assistants, right? What you'd have to do is take apart each job, skill by skill, and decide whether the pay structures are the same. One of the more critical but easier to address questions is simply equal pay for the same job title. And I think the legislation passed was really equal pay for the same job title, which doesn't exist right now, right? Across the board, women and men who are in the same job title, men on average earn 25 to 40% more. And it is illegal, of course, but it's very costly to pursue that. There are equal pay acts. It's very costly to pursue that. Some states have taken, and California is one of them, a really interesting approach, and that is when you're interviewing somebody for a job and then proceeding to perhaps make them an offer, you can't ask what you're currently earning on your job, because if women are paid less than men, then women will say a salary that is less than the male candidates, and that starts that lower pay at the outset, right? And so making illegal the asking of that question, right, which there can be some very legitimate objections to, but from the perspective of equal pay for the same job title, taking the past salary question out of the equation will lead to higher pay for women relative to men in the same job title.
Thank you very much.
Please thank our group. Thank you all so much. Thank you very much.